Hello, everyone. This is Bedir Memmedli. And first of all, I would like to use this opportunity to appreciate the efforts of Task TV for helping us organize this interesting conversation. And I also would like to thank Task TV activist volunteers. And I'm also hoping that the conversation that we're going to hold today will be very useful, and our viewers will find the topic very interesting and also will advance their understanding of the current situation that's taking place in the region that we're going to cover. By the way, Task TV has been established in summer. It's relatively new. It has been established in spring of this year. It's becoming a very popular TV among Turkish Americans and also people who are interested in what's happening in daily lives of ordinary Turks, what's happening in Turkey. So anything that impacts Turkey and Turkey-related issues. And Task TV currently has about 4 million viewers. So that's very interesting. That's a very big achievement. Today, as I mentioned, I will be covering a topic that is related to the current conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. As you already know, the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan over Mountains Karabakh region of Azerbaijan, or some people refer to this in Russian as Nagorno-Karabakh, or as Azerbaijanis refer to this Dağlık Karabakh or Yukarı Karabakh region, it still remains unresolved. And in early 1990s, when Azerbaijan was in the process of building its independence, building its military, Armenia took advantage of the current situation and occupied Karabakh and other 7 adjacent districts in this area. So as a result of this assault, Karabakh still remains under occupation as of today. We know from time to time we witness confrontation, exchange of fires between Azerbaijani troops and also Armenian troops stationed in the occupied Karabakh region. So, but what happened this month is, I would say, completely different what we have been witnessing so far in terms of scale, in terms of casualties it claimed. So today I am going to introduce Adil Bey, who will cover exactly what happened, why these events took place, and why these events should be considered different from what we have been witnessing so far. So Adil Bey is going to answer my questions, and I will engage him to hold an interesting conversation about the current situation. And my first question will be about the location of that conflict and also the period that took place. So Adil Bey, could you please tell us why this time it took place in Tavus region of Azerbaijan that has nothing to do with Karabakh? So why it took place in July and why it covered that region? Why the scale this time was much different from what we have seen before?
Well, first of all, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for inviting. I would like to also express my gratitude and appreciation to Task TV, to all of its volunteers who are making this possible. This is a big commitment, and the fact that Turkish Americans and other Turkic Americans are so active is very good to see. Secondly, thank you to my colleague, to Bedir Bey, for the kind introduction. We're both co-founders and directors of the US Azeris Network, so certainly we have discussed these type of topics many times before over the years, but it's nice to be able to share that with a wider audience that is watching this, probably not only in the US, but abroad. So let me first say that Tovuz region is pretty far from the Nagorno-Karabakh region. Everybody has heard about the occupation of the Azerbaijani region of Karabakh by Armenia for the past almost 30 years. But what most people haven't heard about is the Tovuz region. In fact, it was quite a surprise for even many Azerbaijanis, because typically that region, while there was some exchange of fire over the years and some very low-level armed conflict, it was mostly border skirmishes. It wasn't anything major, nothing at least compared to what has been happening in Karabakh. And suddenly this escalation. It would be nice to show the map of Azerbaijan and so that people could visualize where Tovuz is and where the Karabakh region are. They're basically, depending on where you count from, but it could be hundreds of kilometers, hundreds of miles away from each other. Now, why that region? That region is a very strategic one. There are 3 different pipelines, export pipelines, that are going through that region. They go from the Caspian Sea, from the Azerbaijani sector of the Caspian Sea, through that region to Georgia, and then from there on to Turkey. And then they interconnect with other pipelines and go all the way to Europe, to several different countries. We're talking about the Baku-Supesa pipeline, which has been exporting oil since 1999. We're talking about the Baku-Ceyhan pipeline, which is the main oil export pipeline that goes all the way to the Ceyhan port in Turkey, which is a Mediterranean port. And we're talking about the Baku-Erzurum pipeline, which is another major gas pipeline that then interconnects to several European pipelines. So to say that these are very important pipelines would be somewhat of an underestimate. These pipelines are very important from the standpoint of energy security, not for Azerbaijan so much, but certainly for Georgia, for Turkey, for Greece, for Albania, for Bulgaria, for Italy, and for many other countries in Europe. In fact, some of the exports of Azerbaijani oil go as far as United States. In addition to the 3 pipelines, and we have a map to show these pipelines as well, there is also a strategic railroad that goes from Baku through Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, and to Kars in Turkey. And of course, from Kars, it's able to connect to other railroads in Europe. This is the so-called East-West railroad, and it's allowing goods to go from east and west, bypassing Iran and bypassing Russia, if needed to be. It is allowing for export channel for Central Asian nations. Let's remember that there are 5 nations in the Central Asian region, which are essentially landlocked and are surrounded by very large neighbors like Russia, China, and Iran. So their only avenue to independently export something westward to Europe and to the United States is through the Caspian Sea and through Azerbaijan. So all of this, all of that infrastructure is going through that small Tovuz region. And I hope that we can show these maps so that our viewers can better visualize it. Now, why did it happen right now? It's certainly hard to pinpoint any one particular reason. There are probably multiple reasons. One of the reasons is certainly the fact that Azerbaijan was on the verge of increasing its exports to Europe, especially its gas exports. And once Azerbaijani gas is available to more countries in Europe, it's certainly becoming a very unwelcome competitor for Russian gas, for Gazprom gas. So that's certainly one of the reasons that a lot of the analysts are attributing to this, including the vice president of the state oil company of Azerbaijan. In fact, right as this the renewed military activity was happening in Tobuz, Azerbaijani leadership made a strategic decision to reactivate an old oil pipeline that goes from Baku to Russia. This is to appease Russia and to basically let it earn income from Azerbaijani oil, and therefore to pacify it, therefore reduce its opposition to Azerbaijani gas going to Europe. But the second reason, which is probably even more important, is the fact that there is a certain power struggle in Armenia itself. Now, Armenia is also a landlocked country like Azerbaijan, and it's in a very tough spot because out of 4 neighbors that it is bordering with, it has very difficult to even plain hostile relations with 3 out of those 4 neighbors. Of course, all of that because of their own doing. Unfortunately for Armenia, their standards of living have been sliding. Their economy hasn't been doing so well. And this is not an opinion of any one particular person or even a group of analysts. This is independent statistics from World Bank, from IMF, and from other international authorities. We can also review different types of rankings that the UN puts out for the UN development goals. It could be the World Bank's annual surveys and many other surveys put out, such as by the World Economic Forum and so on. And you can see that year after year, countries like Azerbaijan and Georgia are improving on those rankings. And Armenia is mostly stagnated. It improves a little bit on some rankings, or it actually falls on some of the other rankings. So the situation there in terms of politics is very fluid. On one hand, we have the current prime minister who came in a revolutionary way to the peak of power in Armenia about 2 years ago. And on the other hand, we have the so-called Karabakh clan, which are people who've been minted basically by the war in the 90s, and that is how they came to occupy positions of power in Armenia. Now, the very last representative, so to speak, of that clan, even though he is not himself from Karabakh, is the defense minister of Armenia. He's basically the last remaining minister who hasn't been changed by the current prime minister. It also so happens that that particular defense minister, Tanayan, has been studying in a very peculiar institution in Moscow in Russia. And that institution is said to be very close to the Russian military intelligence. And so therefore the hypothesis of many analysts is that this little provocation in an unexpected location that was supposed to take Azerbaijani side by surprise was to bolster the standing of that defense minister, make it much harder for the prime minister to fire him, as well as make it easier for that defense minister in the near future to try to perhaps become the prime minister himself. At least this is the hypothesis right now by several analysts, and certainly we're not going to know all the details of this until perhaps years later. But all we can do is put all these puzzles together to try to understand what is really happening there and why it's happening there. And by the way, I should also add that while that skirmish in Tovuz region has been somewhat unexpected, at the same time, the Armenian military was not able to achieve any of its strategic or even tactical objectives, meaning they could not occupy any lands, they could not take any of the Azerbaijani positions there, and they were not able to inflict any major economic damage. So therefore, from military perspective, that particular military provocation did not achieve any of its stated goals. Moreover, in terms of geopolitics, all that did is it basically infuriated Azerbaijan. It has fueled nationalism. It has made tens of thousands, some say up to 100,000 Azerbaijanis pour to the streets, which is by far the largest protest in the past decade or so, and demanding action from the Azerbaijani government, demanding retribution. Over 50,000 Azerbaijanis have volunteered for the army service. I should note that the entire Armenian army is about 60,000 people. So some 54,000 Azerbaijani volunteers who have signed up in just the past 1 week, basically equivalent to the entire size of the Armenian army. And of course, this is in addition to the standing army of Azerbaijan, which is quite large to begin with. So there is no shortage in soldiers or officers, and certainly we can see that there are no shortage in passions and determination to liberate Azerbaijani lands and to once again be able to exercise full sovereignty over all the currently occupied territories.
Thank you, Adil. When we talk about this recent events, confrontation between two countries, it's difficult to ignore international reactions. We saw all kind of reactions, one-sided reactions, balanced reactions from all countries, whether we're talking about major powers or whether we're talking about former post-Soviet countries or neighbors. And how would you comment on all these reactions? Do you think they were more favorable or less favorable this time when it concerns Azerbaijan? And also, speaking of international reactions, it's impossible to ignore the fact that Armenia is a member of CST, the military alliance that includes several former Soviet states. And how would you also comment on this so-called allies, military allies' reactions to this border skirmishes?
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's a very good question, because if we compare the reaction of the international community right now to the military incursion by Armenia into the Tovuz region of Azerbaijan, with even the last large skirmishes back in April of 2016, we will see a very big difference, meaning the international community has been much more subdued, much quieter. It could be because of the pandemic that's ravaging the world right now, or it could be for some other reasons. We will not probably fully know. However, I think that what some of the analysts say sounds correct, that the world community sees that this is clearly a provocation and aggression by the Armenian army, that this is an attempt by the Armenian army to improve its military positions in that strategic region of Tovuz. It's also realizing that Azerbaijan has a strong army and therefore Armenian army will not be able to improve its positions. And knowing precisely because of what you have mentioned, that because of CSTO membership, which translates into Russian NATO, Azerbaijan is not going to go into some full-scale war on the territory of Armenia. And therefore the calculation is that, well, they will fight a little bit and then everything will quiet down, because Armenia doesn't have the capacity or capability to do any kind of large-scale incursions unless it's done for them by the Russian army. And Azerbaijan, while has the capacity, is not going to do that for geopolitical and security reasons. Now, a little bit more about CSTO. CSTO, like I said, is basically the Russian NATO. It was created as some kind of semblance of a military union among the former Soviet republics. Azerbaijan is not a member of it, neither is Georgia, neither are many other countries in the former Soviet Union.
Including Ukraine, of course.
Including Ukraine, that's right, or Moldova. So these Guam countries are not members of CSTO. And the 6 countries that are members, which includes Russia and Armenia, of those 6 countries, 3 have unequivocally supported Azerbaijan in this latest provocation by the Armenian army. So we're talking about Belarus, a very important member of CSTO, which has clearly supported Azerbaijan. We're talking about Kazakhstan, which is a traditional, very important ally of Azerbaijan, and Kyrgyzstan, which is a smaller country, but nevertheless strategically very important country in the Central Asian region. So 3 members out of 6 did not even support Armenia and actually supported Azerbaijan. But more importantly, what was very interesting is that it seems that Putin himself did not allow this conflict to go further, and to repeated attempts by Armenian Prime Minister as well as Armenian Defense Minister to call up the CSTO membership, to condemn Azerbaijan, to do a meeting. All of that was not allowed, despite repeated attempts by the Armenian side. So they literally posted a press release, which they then retracted and removed from their website within hours. And the meeting that they have tentatively scheduled has been canceled without any further comment. That tells us a lot about the fact that the overwhelming majority of countries, members of CSTO, as well as responsible individuals, even within Russia, are not supportive of this highly adventurous and irresponsible provocations that the Armenian defense minister has spearheaded. In fact, his own prime minister criticized him at a meeting, at a Security Council meeting, saying that was that really necessary to escalate like that in Toulouse. So all of this happened in the aftermath of realizing that CSTO is not really gonna help them in something like that because majority of its members are not on the Armenian side to begin with and are quite unreliable in respect of trying to use CSTO against Azerbaijan in this case. So it's a very important development because the only reason Armenia has been a member of CSTO is to be able to dangle that in front of Azerbaijan saying that, hey, we're members of CSTO, you can't do anything to us. And if you dare to do, then CSTO will come and punish you. And as we have seen, neither CSTO nor even Russia were very enthusiastic about something like that, knowing full well who is the provocateur and who is the victim.
Thank you, Adil. Back to the same questions. I know we talked about Russia, we talked about CSTO countries' response. How about United States? Do you see U.S. reaction kind of passive or adequate? And also, how about reaction from Turkey? Do you think that reaction was timely and adequate, or something else was missing?
Well, let me first start with the United States. It pains me that U.S. doesn't seem to have a strategy towards South Caucasus and Azerbaijan in particular. Therefore, the reaction has been basically no reaction at all. Like I said, it could be because of the pandemic, and U.S. is certainly hit very hard by the pandemic. We know that. It also could be because of the different trade disputes and a lot of events that are happening in U.S. right now, which make something happening in a small region, in a small country somewhere far away, somewhat of an afterthought for U.S. policymakers. We also know that it's time for presidential elections, which are just a month away. So that means all the energy and all of the capacity of the current administration, as well as its opposition in the form of the Democratic Party, is all preoccupied with that, mostly with domestic affairs, as well as with some trade-related, which really means China, affairs. But nevertheless, if we forget about 2020, which is a very odd year, and just look at 2019 or look at 2018 or look at 2017, we will still see the fact that U.S. wasn't very active all this time and has never really articulated a very clear strategy. Now, we do know that there is a certain strategy from years past. There are certainly U.S. national interests which have been articulated decades ago, and they're still very much in force. But we don't really see any kind of active movement. We don't see any kind of high-level interest. We're not even talking about president or vice president level. We're talking about even Secretary of State level, or even a deputy Secretary of State. We don't see any of that. So hopefully that's going to change. It has been quite anemic for now. Two administrations, both the Trump administration and the Obama administration, have been lacking interest and have also not been as supportive of its pro-Western allies, such as Azerbaijan, as the Bush administration, for example, has. So this is in regards of United States. Now, when we look at Turkey, we see something very different. Turkey has been extremely supportive of Azerbaijan. Turkey, in fact, despite a multitude of its own domestic and international problems, has spoken out very, with a very loud voice by stating its unequivocal support for Azerbaijan. It has been said by President Erdogan. It has been said by many other people in his government, including the defense minister and several other people within the military, within the Turkish military. In fact, as the Armenian aggression against Azerbaijan in the Tovuz region was happening, a high-level Azerbaijani general flew to Turkey to conduct some important negotiations, and he was later joined by yet another general, where they were concluding some negotiations on the purchases of very advanced Turkish drones for their Azerbaijani military. These are the same drones that have shown themselves very favorably in both Syria and Libya against Russian weapons. So that certainly says a lot about where the relationship between Turkey and Azerbaijan are. We should also remember that Turkey and Azerbaijan have a certain very strong historical relationship. There's certainly a military cooperation treaty. There's a treaty on friendship, and there is even a 1921 treaty, the Kars Treaty, that allows Nakhchivan exclave of Azerbaijan. So if you look at the map of Azerbaijan, if you see that small land in the southwest, that's Nakhchivan, that's Azerbaijan's Alaska, as we like to joke. And that has a special protected status by that 1921 treaty, which allows Turkey to legally exercise its military force and its military protection over that particular region, making it safe from Armenian provocations, and which is frankly why Nakhchivan remains to be independent despite very difficult times in the late 80s and early 90s when it was completely blockaded by Armenia since 1989. So Turkish reaction has been quite exemplary for an ally, but of course, at the end of the day, none of the countries around the world will be able to resolve this. This is something that both Azerbaijanis and Armenians have to understand. Neither Russia, no US, no Turkey, no Iran, no Europe, no China, doesn't matter who, none of those countries, none of those powers will be able to resolve these very unfortunate relations between these two nations. Armenia needs to really understand that it's spending a disproportionate amount of its budget on occupation of Azerbaijan. It could have been redirecting all that money into healthcare. Right now, Armenia has the worst track record in former Soviet Union in terms of the coronavirus infections. It's literally number one in something where you really shouldn't be number one. It's not a source of pride. So they have the largest number of infections per capita, whereas Azerbaijan has one of the lowest. So healthcare is definitely something that Armenian side needs to spend much more attention and much more money on. There are many other things like infrastructure. You know, it has a nuclear plant, which is essentially using the same technology as the Chernobyl nuclear plant. They're still working on that. They're still functioning. It's still generating some 40% of Armenia's electricity. I mean, that's basically a time bomb that can explode at any moment, and that will affect everybody in the region, because a nuclear explosion is an environmental disaster that affects everybody, irrespective of where they are in the region. So this is what Armenia should be really preoccupied with. This is where it should be spending its money, not on occupying about 16% of Azerbaijan, not on really unnecessary attempts to provoke Azerbaijani army in other districts and other regions like Tovuz. It makes no sense. It really makes no sense for those who are still exercising sound judgment. It's really important to realize this and to try to find some ways out, because at the end of the day, both countries are going to be neighbors. They're going to be neighbors for a very long time, and therefore they have to find a way to coexist peacefully. And that means within internationally recognized borders. That means without war. We can learn from experience of the World War II, when Germany now has excellent relations with all of its neighbors. Countries like France and UK, which have fought for hundreds of years, are enjoying pretty good relations. And there are many other examples like that throughout the world. So there's really no reason why Azerbaijan and Armenia also cannot enjoy at least cordial relations. But that means they really have to, Armenian side has to stop its occupation. It has to withdraw. It has to comply with the 4 UN Security Council resolutions dating back to 1993. And they have to do the right thing. Once they do that, and not only will investments flow, but they will save so much money, and they will be able to become, much more prosperous and much happier country. By the way, aside from leading the world in the coronaviruses, leading the region in terms of infections, Armenia also leads the world in terms of being the angriest place in the world. According to Gallup polls, Armenia is the angriest nation in the world. It's also one of the most stressed nations in the world, whereas both of its neighbors, Azerbaijan and Georgia, are much less stressed and much more happy. All of these statistics from all of these different reviews and surveys and reports, this is not propaganda. This is done by independent, different organizations that are not connected to each other and that have been doing their job on an international scale, and they're showing the reality. So it becomes very hard to deny that when you're being consistently placed at the very bottom of basically every single ranking, even if that bottom means being number 1. Because of the way it's being counted, where number 1 is actually the worst place.
Okay, interesting. Thanks, Adil. You, interesting enough, you talked about popular movement in Azerbaijan, how ordinary people flooded the streets in Baku and other major cities. They decided to volunteer for army to show their support, solidarity with Azerbaijani military. We also saw similar movement around the world, in different countries, in United States, in Western Europe, in Eastern Europe, in former Soviet Union, in neighboring Iran, how Azerbaijanis raised, they went to the streets, they showed their solidarity with Azerbaijani military. So, but unfortunately, some of these events were accompanied by brutal attack by Armenian demonstrators. So I would call it hate crimes. So what would be your reaction? What would you say to these Armenians? Should we get concerned about this assaults? Should we start thinking about another Asala terrorist organization that is going to rise in 21st century? So any concerns, anything we should take very seriously, or it's just like kind of small incidents? How would you look at this?
Well, this is a very important point. Well, first of all, I want to say that I am very disheartened and disappointed, to say the least, that people who are exercising their right for peaceful protest are being beaten up in a savage way, and then those beatings that by multiple people against one man
Yes, we
who's
talked
laying
about
in
very
blood.
serious bodily injuries, people being hospitalized, getting
Yes.
very serious injuries. Some of them may even stay permanent.
Absolutely, absolutely. Very serious injuries. And then some of these Armenian provocateurs are posting that on social media
Yes,
with
making
some
fun of it.
gleeful comments. This doesn't really do any justice, as the Azerbaijani man who was being savagely beaten by about 10 attackers, thus telling them is that you guys are not men to do something like that. And that is indeed true. That goes totally contrary to the culture in which we as people in the Caucasus are being brought up. This is absolutely unmanly when 10 guys are attacking one person. So the hero and the real Pehlivan in this story is that one Azerbaijani, whereas those 10 around him, there are quite a few names by which they can be easily called and are being called, certainly. Now, this is not the first time that these type of provocations are happening, and it's virtually always not virtually always, it's always, at least in the experience that we have seen and the reports that we have read and personal experience that we've dealt with, it's the Armenian side. I have personally been in different protests, as Bedir Bey has been over the years, in Washington, D.C., in New York, in Los Angeles. Since I studied in Los Angeles at USC, I've taken part in several protests back in the day there. I have seen these type of events happening all the time. So this year, just days ago, several Azerbaijanis, about 7, including a woman, were beaten up by Armenian provocateurs in Los Angeles. Then several more Azerbaijanis were also beaten by an overwhelming, a much larger Armenian crowd in Europe, specifically in Belgium. And again, an Azerbaijani woman was affected, a journalist, by the way.
Yes, they didn't even care about journalists, media representatives.
Yeah, and by the way, I haven't seen a statement from Reporters Sans Frontières or some other journalism protection agencies about that. Typically, they're so quick to react in many other cases, but not in these particular cases. But we've seen this 2 years ago in France, for example, when again an Azerbaijani woman and an Azerbaijani man were beaten up by an angry Armenian crowd in Paris. And then, of course, we've seen these type of provocations here in US too, including in Washington, D.C. and in Los Angeles. In fact, I have seen something more at USC, and around 1995, the Armenian Student Association, which numbered about 600 students, started a fire at a place where the Turkish Student Association, that numbered only 70 students, was trying to hold its annual event. So that event had to be canceled. Then around 1999, something similar happened when a very large group of Armenian students, typically it's the Dashnak youth, the youth from basically a terrorist party, a party that's been founded on terrorism in 1890 and has basically invented that whole concept, or at the very least taken it to the next level. They have similarly come in 99 and interfered with the annual Turkish Student Association's party. So police had to be involved. The Turks, mostly women and children, had to be evacuated. The party had to be stopped. So, but you will never find.
I was going to say what you very interesting to note that the Armenian youth that you're referring to, they all were born in this country. They were raised here. Most of them haven't even been to Armenia yet. that makes things more interesting. They haven't seen the suffering, they haven't seen
Exactly.
hostilities, they
Exactly.
haven't been to battlefield,
Exactly.
but I'm not sure it's the way they have been raised, disciplined by their parents, or the spirit is kind of different. So that makes things more different because you haven't been there, you haven't seen what's going on, but suddenly you are the most hostile person.
Absolutely. It's a very good point that you're bringing in, that I know this because I've actually spoken to several such youth back in the 1990s and in 2000s and in the later years. I know that they've never been to the region. They've never, and if they've been, a very small number of them, they've been as tourists staying in nice hotels. None of them have actually lived there. None of them have lived the life of an ordinary Armenian in the land there, in the country. But even if some of them would have stayed there for some time, none of them have served in those front lines. None of them have been in those trenches. So it's very easy to play a hero and a tough guy somewhere in the US when you have a crowd of 3,000 against 50 Azerbaijanis. This is a real number, a real statistic from the Los Angeles. The 3,000 estimate comes from Armenian diaspora itself, and 50 is the estimate from the Los Angeles police of the Azerbaijani size, as well as Azerbaijani self-reported numbers. So Azerbaijanis have been outnumbered many, many times over, and of course it's very easy to be a tough guy. What I suggest that all of these tough guys actually go to Armenia immediately to prove their patriotism, that they volunteer for the Armenian army, and that specifically they volunteer for the Karabakh area, so that they go into the trenches there. And let's see how long you will last there. I'm pretty sure that once you will experience that, you will have some cold feet. So this is not the right way of dealing with the situation. I really don't understand how can so many people cheer something like that, because there's absolutely nothing heroic in that, and it's very unfortunate. All that does is that it delays peace, it delays normal relations, and that means it delays normal life for millions of people, including 3 million Armenians that live there in the region. So all you're doing is you're postponing their happiness while you're drinking some pina colada or some mocha somewhere on Sunset Boulevard in Santa Monica or Los Angeles. It really doesn't work that way. The real life is very different from that. Thankfully there are some cool heads, but unfortunately their numbers are very small, and it's not clear how long it will take for the reality to finally sink in, and for the Armenian side to do the right thing, which would prevent all bloodshed and improve relations instantly, and just make life so much better for everybody.
Thanks, Adil, for highlighting these events. We have limited time, so I will have my last question, but this question will be about hope for peace. So it brings us back to peaceful resolution of this conflict. So I know we all want peace. Ordinary Armenians want to see peace, stability in the region. So in light of all this cause, in all this desire for peaceful resolution of this conflict, I would like to know, I know in the past Azerbaijan gave Armenian side offer highest ever seen autonomy for Armenians living in Azerbaijan or Azerbaijani citizen of Armenian heritage. So going back to that offer, do you think in light of all these clashes took place, in all this government change that took place in Armenia, do you think Azerbaijani side or Azerbaijani government is still ready to give that offer to Armenian side again? I'm talking about highest autonomy, having your own cultural autonomy, up to the point you can have your own military, your own flag. Do you think that can still be put on agenda?
Well, so far I haven't seen any kind of retraction from the Azerbaijani side, so we can only go by what's officially has been stated and promulgated. Absolutely. If the cost of peace and normalization and good relations and no bloodshed is full autonomy, you know, having your own flag and so on and so forth, and that avoids a war, that avoids casualties, that restores the human potential, the life, the socioeconomic development, and so on, then that absolutely is worth it. But under no circumstances would Azerbaijan allow independence of the occupied Azerbaijani territories or any kind of other quasi status where it's not clear whom does it belong to. Karabakh has been historically an Azerbaijani region. It has been an Azerbaijani region for thousands of years, even before people who today are called Azerbaijanis, even before they were called Azerbaijanis. So it doesn't really matter how you're called, just like French were not called French centuries ago, they were Gauls. And so many other people who are today called in one way, well, back several centuries ago, they were called something else by historical record. Karabakh has never been part of Armenia, never. This is very well established. There is not a single shred of evidence that shows it otherwise. It's also never had predominantly Armenian population. This is also true because when we say Karabakh, we mean the historic region. We don't mean some artificially created little entity that you can see by looking at it on the map that it has been drawn by a pencil, that it has these strange borders which are designed to include certain towns and certain villages and exclude some others, all based on ethnicity, as it was created by Soviet Bolsheviks in the 1920s. So Karabakh has been part of Azerbaijan.
By the way, for speaking of Bolsheviks, that's very common justification that I hear so often. Stalin gave, or Bolsheviks gave Karabakh to Armenia. They always confuse giving something with living within the borders of Azerbaijan. So
absolutely. This is a deliberate disinformation that has been done by Armenian historians. Anybody who can read Russian language can pick up the original decision from the 1920s and can see very clearly that it says for Nagorno-Karabakh to remain within Azerbaijan borders. It has never been said that it will be returned or transferred. Actually, we've analyzed this quite with huge details, a lot of details in this particular journal. Many years ago, there are several articles that go in great detail over all the legal aspects, historical aspects, demographics, going through archival information and showing all that. So Karabakh has been part of Azerbaijan. It will always remain to be. In the latest events, what the provocation by the Armenian defense minister, by the Armenian army, by the Armenian government has done is that it actually solidified and the intention of Azerbaijani people to return all of its lands back under its control. And it has shown to the whole world that there is really no opposition or government or whatever different fractions within Azerbaijani society on that particular issue. This is U.S. polling, by the way, done by with the grants from the U.S. Development Agency, USAID, is sponsoring these polls every single year in all the countries of the former Soviet Union, including in the South Caucasus. And every single year, they show that the Karabakh issue is by far the most important issue for Azerbaijanis, at least for 92% of Azerbaijanis. There is no other issue that even comes close to it. By the way, in Armenia, the number one issue is always economic issue. It's always jobs, wages, and so on, the financial situation, with Karabakh being only number 4 or so. So this is very important to denote. So Azerbaijani people will never give up. 30 years have passed. If anybody was hoping that the new generation will be softer and that they will let it go, well, they've been proven wrong, something that those who knew the region have been telling them all along. And we can see that when up to 100,000 people just poured to the streets in Azerbaijan for the first time in a decade or in many, many years, and do this in a fashion where it was not announced, it was not allowed even, it was not pre-authorized. Despite that, they poured to the streets and they demanded action. So this shows that the Azerbaijani government will have to do something about this. And quite frankly, there have been too many statements from the Azerbaijani side that their patience is not infinite, that there is a limit to it. So it seems like that limit is rapidly approaching because nobody wants to wait another 30 years. And unfortunately for the region and for the people, there are more weapons in that region on both sides. There's more than enough for a full scale of very destructive war. However, because of larger potential, both military, industrial, human, and territorial, the Azerbaijani side will prevail. It's very easy to see that for anybody who will just try to look at pure facts and not propaganda. So therefore, I don't really understand why are the Armenian nationalists poisoning the well for all of their own people and are not allowing for more substantive peace negotiations to take place, because it's not a secret that in the past several years, those peace negotiations have been a joke. There's been nothing substantive, nothing of interest. Everything has been stalling. Every time there is some kind of government change, the new government comes in and says, oh, wait, we need some time to figure things out. And then they launch these type of quote-unquote surprise attacks in regions like Tobruk, hoping to bolster their ratings, hoping to improve their military, strategic, and tactical positions, and failing. And all that does is it just infuriates the Azerbaijani side. And we have all seen very clearly the potential with over 50,000 volunteers signing up, with new military weapons being purchased, with increased number of countries coming to Azerbaijan's support. It's not only Turkey, by the way. Pakistan, for example, also declared that it's ready to support Azerbaijan in every way possible with every weapon system it has. So the situation is very dire, and it sounds like the Armenian government needs to really take this much more seriously and not keep on looking at it as a zero-sum game, but really try to understand and try to come to some kind of a understanding with Azerbaijan and sign some kind of a stage-by-stage agreement where it can take several years to actually do everything, but at least it would be the right steps in a certain sequence that they can start doing now to avoid escalation, any further escalation of this.
Thanks so much, Adil. This ends our conversation, and I really appreciate your time. Thanks for sharing your views and also very, very interesting facts with our viewers. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much once again for inviting. Thank you, Bedir Bey, for moderating. I'd like to express once again the very words of appreciation to Task TV. It's a very nice initiative, and I'm glad that so many people are watching it and taking note. And I hope to see more interesting guests in the years ahead. And I also hope that we can finally show some of the Azerbaijani maps to help our viewers visualize what was happening in the past week or in the past 2 weeks, and be able to put that in the larger context to better understand the very complex geopolitics and geoeconomics of that region. So thank you very much.
Websites can be utilized for that purpose. I'm sure that there will be opportunity to share these maps. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.